Chapters 19-22 of Philomene's Marriages by Henri Gréville. Translated by Helen Stanley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. A Pretty Picture. At daybreak the door opened softly, the maid went out to get some milk, and the two young men slipped into the house. Marie went to meet them, holding a finger to her lips. Everything is going on well," she said. She passed a good night. Don't wake Virginie." Where is she?" asked Masson. Marie pointed to the open door of the drawing room. Amidst disordered things and furniture moved from its place, with a table cover under her head in guise of a pillow, Virginie was sleeping on a sofa, dressed and covered with a shawl. Her lips, slightly open, displayed her white teeth; her long eyelashes threw a dark shadow on her cheeks; and two braids of hair, that twined around her neck, fell on her clasped hands. She looked sad, and one could see that she had wept before going to sleep. Verroy peeped in at the door, and regarded the young girl with a father and artist's eyes. The simplicity of the scene, Virginie's sadness and beauty, touched at once both his heart and his love of art. Masson, seeing him motionless, ventured to advance his head in the same direction, and was struck by the sight. Marie, who had left them to go into the kitchen, returned just as a slight movement of the sleeper made one of her beautiful tresses fall to the ground. She drew Masson back by the skirt of his jacket. Will you have done?" said she to him in a low voice. Should a man look at a young girl sleeping? You ought to feel that you steal something of her innocence from her." But," muttered Masson, bewildered by her speech, Charles looked at her, and then she is so pretty." Charles is married, it's not the same thing. And then he was wrong to do so. Come away, both of you, my good friends." She drew them outside, and shut the drawing room door. What shall we do?" asked Verroy. I am very hungry." You will take a cup of milk, and then return to La Heuserie, where the lamps have been burning, and the windows open all night." So much the better," Masson said, philosophically. The oil will thus have left no odor. There is nothing that smells worse." While our friends were partaking of some excellent cafe au lait, seated before the kitchen table, Virginie appeared, timid, and with her eyes, that were still full of sleep, dazzled by the daylight. She rubbed her eyelids slowly with the back of her hand, and seemed only half awake. She had gathered up the tresses of her hair, however. She said good morning to the young men, with a sweetness full of gratitude, and wished to busy herself in fulfilling the common duties of hospitality towards them. But Marie objected, and waited on them herself. But I have not sat up all night," Virginie tried to say. Madame Verroy imposed silence on her by kissing her forehead, and made her sit down to her breakfast. Oh, Madame," said the young girl, carrying Marie's hand to her lips, which she afterwards pressed to her eyes, full of grateful tears. Marie held the young girl's head softly to her warm heart, that was void of maternal happiness, and Virginie felt at once that she had another friend who was as tender and as true as her godmother. Chapter 20. Private Theatricals. The sun penetrated the large, clean, bright kitchen in great floods of light, leaving its rays everywhere — on the brass saucepans, that were more brilliant than gold; on the pastry molds, that looked like the tiaras of Assyrian kings; on the enamel of porcelain, and the varnish of faience; on the small, soft rolls of bread that were gilded with the yolk of eggs; on the bright golden butter and the vine leaf forming its casket. The happiness of the new day seemed to be united to the returned health of the mistress of the pleasant place, and our guests, individually as well as collectively, were declaring they had never tasted such good cafe au lait, when the door opened, and the tragic nose and melodramatic eyes of Theodore Lavenel entered. He bowed to the assemblage with the air of a man who is not in the least astonished, and who knows exactly how things are happening; then, addressing Virginie alone, without being wanting in politeness for this reason to the others: Ah, my dear Mademoiselle," he said, how much anxiety you must have had! I heard of the accident last night, just as I was going to bed. I did not take the liberty of coming here —" his ominous eye gave a look at Masson, as though to say to him, Caught! — for I know too well that a stranger is in the way on such occasions, but I thought of your sorrow all night long, and I could not close my eyes." Virginie, without knowing why, felt hurt at this speech. Lavenel would have done better not to have spoken of strangers in the presence of those who had just proved themselves so helpful. She was not used to the polite falsehoods of civilization. She ignored everything about the great art of annoying people without giving them a right to be angry, but her natural frankness served her admirably. If it had not been for these gentlemen and for Madame Verroy, my poor godmother would have probably died on the road, Monsieur Lavenel," she replied, simply. Think what cause we have then for blessing their presence." Lavenel bowed to the right hand and to the left, with the air of a man who desires to be amiable, no matter what it may cost. ^^And," continued he, with angelic sweetness, will Madame and those gentlemen have the kindness to continue their good offices towards your poor godmother?" As long as they will be necessary, Monsieur Lavenel," Marie replied, curtly. I beg your pardon, but I am going up stairs." With a very slight bow to the intruder, she disappeared on the stairway. Masson looked at Lavenel with curiosity, that odd creature, who resembled at the same time a sacristan, a bailiff's clerk, and a little, but very little, a small provincial tradesman, amused him extremely. His comedian's instinct urged him to something malicious. He arranged his face so that it resembled the flour merchant's. He tied a foulard silk handkerchief, plaited it in small folds round his neck, making a rosette and two little ends in front. He drew his hair over his brow and on his temples, enlarged his waistcoat, drew up his suspenders, put his hands in the pockets of his jacket, that seemed suddenly to have become limp, and did it all with a series of movements that were so natural that no one had perceived him. Lavenel, turning towards the young girl after having bowed to Madame Verroy's back, found himself face to face with his prototype. By having buried his chin in his cravat, Masson had succeeded in imitating the flour merchant's profile. Utterly amazed, for the man he saw in front of him did not in the least resemble the one he had seen a short time before, Lavenel looked twice at the new face. Masson, who remained impassible, looked at him also with the same astonished air. Then our disconcerted hero lifted his eyes upon Charles, who with great trouble kept serious. Happily for the sanity of Philomene's lover, the latter had not changed his appearance, and, in order to avoid the consequences of the mystification, he hastened to ask some commonplace questions of the bewildered man. While he was answering them, Masson had reassumed his usual appearance, and when Lavenel, who was much disturbed, turned to look at him again, he only found before him the young actor whom he knew. Incapable of explaining this metamorphose to himself, the poor, astonished man became so confused in what he was saying that he ended: Well, Mademoiselle Virginie, I leave quite at your service." Masson hastened to open the door for him, and Lavenel drew aside a little, so as not to touch him in passing. I believe if a holy water fount had been there, he would have sprinkled him with holy water; but there was none at hand, and Lavenel found himself in the street without having exorcised any one. What is the matter?" Virginie asked, seeing the two friends fall back in their chairs laughing convulsively, and trying to stifle their merriment in their handkerchiefs for fear of disturbing Madame Aubier. Masson," Verroy tried to say, Masson showed him how he looks." And as he is not handsome, it frightened him," concluded the actor. Virginie looked at them alternately, without understanding them. Masson at once reproduced Lavenel's type with more perfection than the first time, for practice spoils nothing, and gave the young girl a bow so faithfully modeled after the unfortunate absent man's, that in spite of her anxieties, she could not help laughing in her turn. He takes me for the devil," the young man said, as he put his foulard handkerchief in his pocket and looked like himself once more. Perhaps he is not wrong," said Charles. In that case," Virginie said, smiling, you would be a good devil, Monsieur." Surprised and charmed, the young man answered her smile. The warm sympathy he had felt for her the day before rose from his heart to his brain like a breath of spring air, and he opened his lips to say something that he decided to keep to himself. Come," said Charles, who had taken his overcoat, come, we will go and put out our lamps if they are still burning. We will return soon to hear how things are going. Au revoir, Mademoiselle." Au revoir, and thanks," said Virginie, placing her brown hand in Verroy's. Masson extended his, open, towards her. She hesitated an instant, then put the ends of her fingers in it, and withdrew them at once, with a fugitive blush on her face. A tantôt," said Masson, almost in a low voice. The door closed upon them very softly, so softly that they pushed it in to see if it were shut. Then they took the road towards their home. The air was strong and pure. The tranquil bay was deep blue. The cliffs of Aurigny shone white in the distance, illumined as they were by the rising sun. Our friends walked for a moment in silence, with the rapid and elastic step that the freshness of morning inspires. When they had passed the last houses of the village, Charles remarked that his friend had a much more preoccupied look than usual. Of what are you thinking?" said he to him softly, so as not to disturb his reverie rudely. Those who dream often know how harsh and unpleasant seems the voice that throws you suddenly into reality. How beautiful is innocence!" Masson answered in the same tone of voice. In cities, my dear fellow, one has not an idea of it. The best brought up little girls have all taken some small boy's arm." Well?" said Charles, who could not follow the current of his friend's thoughts. Well, that Virginie, who has never touched a man's arm — it touches me, yes, Charles, it touches me. And then, too, when your wife scolded us because we had looked at her asleep, your wife was right. She has a noble soul and an honest heart. She was right, pardieu!" Surprised at this dithyrambic speech, Charles looked at his companion more attentively, and found that he wore a serious and impressed look that one rarely met on his face, and only on great occasions. What is the matter with you?" said he to him. You do not seem in your ordinary frame of mind." What is the matter with me?" answered Masson, enthusiastically. I am surprised at it myself. Charles, my friend, I believe I am in love." Oh, Virginie, the truly named!" exclaimed he, extending his arms towards Di^lette, that shone brightly in the sand below their path. It is your purity that has conquered me." He was in joke, but the trembling of his lips showed a deep emotion. Let us sit down," said he to Verroy, pointing out a large stone to him. I do not know what is the matter with me. It seems to me I am drunk, and that in my eyes there is a sun that blinds me. A young girl, my friend, a real young girl. You do not know, you cannot know what that means to an actor. He plays every night with an ingénue 40 years old, who leads a life that makes electric lights pale before it. We are taken to the theatre to play the part of small boys in emotional plays, with little girls to whom the devil has nothing more to teach — children who reveal things to one that even we would not dare to think of — and behold, on a lovely July day, on the beach, on the cliffs or on the road to La Heuserie, one meets a young girl 20 years old, fascinatingly beautiful, made like a nymph, gentle, good and clever, and who knows nothing of life — nothing — who has always walked alone in her pathways, who has only dreamed of her godmother and whose cheek is as virginal as her heart. Do you understand what I feel, Charles?" I understand it," Verroy replied, gravely. But you must not become lyrical, my friend. Do you want to marry her?" Ah ! certainly I want to do so. I wish I were a millionaire, so I could cover that adorable creature with diamonds and make her the queen of the world." You would render her a very bad service. She is charming in her obscurity, but the full glare of public life would not suit her, perhaps. Besides, we have not got as far as that. Can you marry her now?" Ah ! sighed Masson, regretfully, you break the wings of my dream. No, I cannot marry. One cannot marry with what I earn at the theatre." They set forth walking again, both of them in silence. After a second, Masson said to his friend : You think it is not serious because it has come too suddenly. Well, I declare to you it is serious. Now that I love her, all other women displease me. She possesses what none other can offer me — the charm of purity. Listen, a little while ago, when I held out my hand to her, and her fingers scarcely touched me, I felt it was the first time she had touched a man's hand. That woman shall be mine, only mine, or I will use all my resources in vain." Wait a little to see if it will last," continued Charles. As soon as you have returned to the theatre, you will think no more about it." The theatre? Thank you. Ah! Velontine, cold cream and champaka, the royal perfume — I am disgusted with you forever." We will see," said Verroy, unmoved. If you still think of it 3 months hence, we will talk of it again." Ah ! if I were rich !" muttered Masson, between his teeth. But I do not even dare to wish to be rich. It would be wrong in me. Come, my dear fellow, meanwhile we will paint some water colors and try to sell them." Paint as many as you like. My laziness is content in watching you. I imagine it is I who am working." But instead of painting water colors, Masson stretched himself out at length on a mat in the courtyard, and, with his face turned towards heaven, dreamed all day of Virginie. CHAPTER XXI. SAD COOKING. Towards midday a sharp nose and yellow hair made their appearance at La Heuserie, accompanied by a basket containing some fresh fish, morning eggs, and a little roll of fresh butter. Masson, awakened from his reverie, profited by the liberty that country life authorizes, to lean simply on his elbow and inspect the new comer. I thought," said the latter, approaching softly, that probably you would have nothing to eat." I do not know," the actor answered indifferently. I believe Verroy is boiling some potatoes, for we could not find any knives. We are alone." So I learned," continued Philom^ne, and I came to bring you something better than my cousin's potatoes — be it said without wishing to blame him." He is not clever at cooking," said Masson, with the same indifference towards human beings; but it is all the same to me, I am not hungry." I am not a good cook either, but I am going to try to awaken your appetite," said Philom^ne, planted before him, and gazing at him with tender eyes. You look very tired. Monsieur Masson; are you not ill?" I? No! 1,000 thanks, dear Madame," said the young man, finally deciding to rise. He stretched himself without disturbing Philom^ne in her contemplation, and went towards the house, which she entered, close on his heels. Charles had renounced endeavoring to make his potatoes boil. Sadly seated in the large fireplace on a small stool that served Marie in the cabalistic operations that preceded their repasts, he watched the water evaporating insensibly in the great gulf black with soot, and saw with regret that the water would soon be completely vanished, and that the potatoes would not be boiled. What are you doing there, cousin?" asked Philom^ne, entering. I don't know, ma foi, nothing. I have been vainly endeavoring to procure some food. If you, at least," said he to Masson, had come to help me instead of dreaming of your love." Masson made a warning, angry sign to his imprudent friend, which the latter feigned not to perceive. He dreams of his love," continued he, stretched out on his back, and I struggle to make this pot boil, without succeeding. You see, however, there is a large fire." Yes, but your pot has no cover to it. I think I come very opportunely." You always come opportunely," said Charles, graciously, who was softened at the thought that he was going to leave his post for a good place at the table. You are very amiable, cousin. Here, Monsieur Masson, go and get some wine and cider, and return immediately. Everything will be ready." While the friends were in the cellar, Philom^ne upset the house so completely that in the twinkling of an eye the table was laid, and an hundred things were strewn about in all the corners. It was one of Madame Cr^pin's peculiarities, that she overturned an entire kitchen to boil an egg. However, when the two men found themselves seated before a good meal, a feeling of very natural gratitude made them show 1,000 kindnesses to her who had rescued them. Ma foi, cousin," said Charles, when the coffee was smoking in the cups, you have saved our lives. How one becomes spoiled, however! When I was a bachelor, how many times I was obliged to prepare my own food! Then I knew how to go to work about it, but then years of marriage give one habits of laziness and comfort. One must be very unhappy as a bachelor, is it not so. Monsieur Masson?" asked Philom^ne, rejoiced at their praises and rejuvenated by her joy. Phew! That depends upon the way one looks at it, and also upon circumstances," the actor replied. In certain cases one is unhappy, especially as regards cooking and linen, but outside of those two necessities of life, I do not see that one is so much to be pitied." Philom^ne modestly lowered her eyes over her cup, and added a morsel of sugar to her coffee, in which she had already put 2. One is, however, much happier in married life," continued she, turning round the liquid with her little spoon. I have had many sorrows in my life, but my happiest time was when the Captain was on shore, and I believe it must be the same with every woman who loves her husband." Masson had a great desire to ask her if the Captain also considered his happiest time that which he passed with her, and if the good man had not been lying in the cemetery, the young actor would not have failed to ask her the question. But he refrained through good breeding, and contented himself with glancing at his friend from the corner of his eye; and the latter, having understood him, gave him a kick under the table, and they began to talk about other things. CHAPTER XXII. The Tale of a Basket. Towards evening the young men return to Di^lette, accompanied by Philom^ne and her eternal little basket. It is with baskets as with men; some have a clean and common air, others seem to despise the vulgarities of this world, and only open themselves for exquisite things — choice fruits, Julien's cakes, Boissier's bonbons, ribbons of delicate colors, and perhaps for a dear, almost imperceptible little dog; others are work day baskets, made for going to market and bringing sorel home, while another will hold feathered and four footed game; others, finally, are small, ugly, and with their platings badly made, revealing to all passers by their owners' secrets; and pray notice that the owners of such baskets would do far better if they were to keep their secrets to themselves. Philom^ne's basket was of the latter kind. Charles could not abide it, and Marie, in order to relieve her husband of the sight of so ugly an object, had bought her cousin another one. But Madame Cr^pin did not like her new basket; she thought it common. It was made of fine black and white willow, and her frightful black basket she thought distingue. It possesses, in truth, a rare ugliness," Charles had said. But he could not carry his point, and it was always the black basket that Philom^ne carried on her arm to and from Di^lette. Charles had been watching it since the morning, and had said to himself it should be the unlucky thing's last day; it was only necessary to make its tenacious owner forget it somewhere, and the rest would be a mere question of choice as to the means by which to make it disappear. But Philom^ne could have been caught without her purse sooner than without her basket, and our friends had the unhappiness, as they were leaving, of seeing Madame Cr^pin take it out of a dark corner, where probably it had not put itself, and with magnanimous calmness hang it triumphantly on her arm. The afternoon was as lovely as that of the day before, but the sun had not set yet; and from time to time the young men stopped to admire the tints on the sands, the sea, and the distant islands, which looked like violet spots on an ocean of fire. Masson, who was under the influence of a new emotion, talked more and better than usual; and in spite of his wish to the contrary, a restrained, lyrical tone lent to his conversation a something that was elevated and poetical, and which noble minds always surely feel. The people adore poetical enthusiasms; they do not understand them, but in the music of syllables, of certain sonorous words, and caring little for their meaning, they find a subtle charm which has been the cause of giving us many ridiculous songs and many bad novels. Philom^ne listened in admiration; she thought the young man who talked so well, with such noble, graceful gestures, especially handsome. Masson was what is called un fils de famille, that is to say, a man of the world, who has received a good education; moreover, he was an actor, and represented the various types of character in the novels Philom^ne had read. In the superb scenic effect made by the beach and cliffs, with the evening sky as a back curtain, Masson gave the illusion of the finest drama to the ignorant woman, and his passionate voice, which was the echo of all he hid within himself, awoke chords in her heart that had been for a long time dumb, and others, too, that had never vibrated before. She had set down her basket in order to hear him, and with her hands crossed, she listened as though she were at a sermon — much better than at a sermon, when a movement of Charles made the object of his antipathy roll to the bottom of the cliff. The black basket turned over and over several times, and only stopped on the edge of the waves that curled beneath almost up to the rocks. The descent was only about 30 feet, and Charles regretted it was not 300, for Philom^ne, uttering a cry of sorrow, endeavored to run after the cherished object. Bah, cousin, leave it alone," said Verroy, drawing her back by her skirts. It is not pretty, it is worth nothing. You have another, and if you care for that one, I will buy you one exactly like it." It was a fallacious promise, which he was quite determined never to keep. No, no," exclaimed Philom^ne, I want that one, and I will have it. My husband bought it for me at Bordeaux." They make very ugly baskets at Bordeaux, then," said Charles; but Masson, who was touched by Philom^ne's hazardous efforts to descend the cliff, was already at the bottom of it, and brought back the precious treasure to its owner, who immediately expressed her great joy and gratitude to him. I have no luck," sighed Charles, but Masson shall pay me for this." What?" asked the latter. Nothing, my friend; you are a hero, and I admire you." Madame Aubier was much better, and Marie was able to confide her without anxiety to Virginie's care. The three friends returned to La Heuserie, while Philom^ne went to her home. She opened the door carefully, and, like a cat that is afraid of burning itself, ventured in the darkness as far as the fireplace. There she procured a light, then she placed her basket on the table, and sitting down opposite, began to look at it. The Captain had, in effect, bought the ugly thing at Bordeaux to hold some unexpected purchase he had made, and brought it back with him, as one brings home such chance acquisitions, because an ill advised feeling of economy leads us to encumber ourselves with useless, disagreeable things, simply in order not to throw them away when once we have paid for them. With her usual want of taste, Philom^ne found it useful and pretty, and from that time would have no other. Like the legendary knife of a certain Janot, who has remained unknown, it has changed its handle and cover many times, and its successive metamorphoses have become dearer and more dear to Philom^ne. The Captain's souvenir returned of itself in the presence of the basket, and his widow accorded him an honorable mention in her memory. Then, by a mysterious transition, and even by no transition at all, she began to think of Masson, and a slight emotion made her heart tremble. With what grace had he descended the cliff, and with what kindness had he brought her back the basket, because she cared for it. Thus thinking, Philom^ne mentally threw a stone at her cousin Charles, who had shown such disdainful indifference to her feelings in that affair. What would she have said, good heavens, had she known the active part he had taken in the event? But she was always doomed to ignorance on this point. Yes, Masson was very kind, perfectly charming. Philom^ne, with her eyes still fixed upon the object that was the cause of so many dreams, recalled one by one her knight's features. His complexion, his eyes, and his nose were the subjects of a retrospective investigation as minute as that of a council of revision, and Madame Cr^pin ended by saying to herself that the young man was very nice indeed. And then he was so amusing. Mon Dieu! How amusing he was! She ignored, however, his talent for imitating Theodore Lavenel. But other drolleries were never wanting in his conversation, and Philom^ne, who did not always understand him, only admired him the more. Ah ! if Lavenel only had a character like that, instead of the cross disposition nature had allotted to him in a moment of ill humor! She could have been very happy with a man with such a character; that was what she wanted. Winter evenings are so long when people have nothing pleasant to say to each other. A husband who can tell stories, that is a happiness. The Captain used to tell stories, which was natural, he had travelled so much. But Masson's stories were very amusing, especially so because Philom^ne found an individual flavor in them. They introduced her into a new fantastic world, wherein everything seemed extraordinary to her. How gay life would be with that man! Here Philom^ne heaved a great sigh. Her thoughts took another turn. She was going to Paris. This was interesting. Paris in itself did not mean much to her. It was, after all, only a city like the other cities; a few houses, more or less, was the only difference. And then she detested Paris. Parisians have a way of thinking everything is better done and nicer there than in the provinces. Now there is not a being endowed with reason who does not know the contrary. First, perhaps she might recover her money; and then she would see Masson. Decidedly, she loved him very much, and that was very natural. And, moreover, he resembled the Captain prodigiously. All widows whose hearts begin to beat again find that the object of their flame resembles their defunct husband; it is a well known thing. Philom^ne's candle was not of the best quality, and it was running sadly down in its socket when the lady remembered she had not supped. To sup alone! How dull it was! She went towards the sideboard in a melancholy way, took a piece of bread and butter, and inflicted this frugal repast upon herself, as though it had been a penance. Not that she repented of her thoughts. Was she not as free as air? But why had she been so stupid as to have allowed Lavenel to circumvent her? She was quite decided not to marry him, of course, but it was too much to have given him the right to say so. It was true this unscrupulous man had betrayed her. It was agreed that they should say nothing to any one, and he had spoken of it to everybody. His mother and himself might deny it as much as they pleased, but as Philom^ne had said nothing, therefore it was they who had tattled. But so much the worse for them They would only be the more ashamed when she should declare they had invented it all, for remember, there had been no witnesses. How ugly Lavenel was! The more she saw him, the more did she find him disagreeable. And then, what was this habit he had taken of going to Madame Aubier's on all occasions? Did he mean to take up his summer quarters there? There was nothing to call him to that house, and Madame Crepin did not intend he should be seen there so often. It was true, since she had given him her promise, he had not come, perhaps 3 times to her house, and he never left the one opposite. She would snub him as he deserved, in anticipation of what he would inherit. Here Philom^ne began to laugh in the 3 stray hairs that ornamented her chin and served her for a beard, as she thought of the anticipated inheritance that would never come to anything — it was an inheritance en Espagne. This thought made her so happy that she went to bed with a novel of Ducray Dumenil's, that she put under her pillow at the end of 10 minutes, so she could find it there in the morning, for she was very fond of reading in bed early in the morning, before she began her day. Chapters 23, 24, and 25 of Philomene's Marriages by Henri Gréville. Translated by Helen Stanley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. CHAPTER XXIII. Indecision. I am recalled," said Masson, sadly, as he passed Charles a letter he had just received. Oh, already?" exclaimed the husband and wife. Alas, my friends, I have been here more than a month, and have overstayed the limit of my vacation. I cannot complain. It is very hard, however, to leave when I am so happy." It is very hard to have you go," said Marie. It is not you whom I pity," Masson answered, after a short silence. You remain here together, while I go off, the devil knows where, and I take nothing away with me to console me." Does that still last?" asked Charles in a low voice, for the inevitable Philom^ne was wandering somewhere about in the house. I was just saying to myself that it will always last." Charles meditated for an instant. Well," said he, return to your surroundings, to your occupations. In 6 weeks we will be at Paris. If you are still of the same mind, we will speak of it again." Speak of it again! What would be the use of it? Would a provincial endowed with reason give his daughter to me? Would that kind Madame Aubier, who loves me with all her heart, now that she is cured of her illness, give her godchild to me? I have neither fortune nor position to offer her. And even were all those obstacles overcome, could I take that good, charming child behind the scenes in the evening before the play began? And then I would be obliged to leave her alone all day while I rehearsed, and at night when I acted. No, it is impossible — perfectly impossible. If I only had 4,000 or 5,000 francs income, I could come and settle here. I have seen some exquisite sights along the coast and inland. I would raise cabbages, as I told you, and I would never think of my theatrical life again. I would have done better to have entered the Seminary, after all, on my word of honor." Quite discouraged, he let his arms fall on the table, and laid his head upon them. Come," said Charles, you must not get discouraged like that. All is not lost. And besides, you always have La Trappe as a last resource. Answer me honestly. Have you ever spoken to Virginie about what you feel for her?" Masson arose suddenly. For whom do you take me?" said he, energetically. The child's greatest charm is her innocence. Do you imagine I would wish to take from her the smallest part of that which forms her moral and physical beauty? No, certainly, I have never said anything to her. I will never say anything, since I cannot ask her to be my wife." Marie held out her hand over the table to the young actor, who kissed it with the affection and respect with which his friend's wife had inspired him for many years. Philom^ne, who always came in at the proper moment, witnessed this act of deference and was much astonished at it. Such habits had not yet penetrated as far as Di^lette. What surprised her the most was Charles's calmness, who had seen the effusion. The charitable woman's eyes glanced alternately from one to the other, until her cousin, wishing to put an end to her perplexity, said to her: Masson is going to leave us." Ah !" said Madame Crepin, who felt such a violent shock overcome her that she was obliged to lean against the near wall to keep from tottering. ^^Ah ! so suddenly? Without any warning?" I was not warned that I should be recalled, dear Madame. answered Masson, endeavoring to appear gay. I leave to morrow at daybreak. What annoys me," said he to Charles, is being obliged to disturb you so early. But don't trouble yourself about me, I will not need any breakfast." You can breakfast at my house," Philom^ne hastily said. By leaving here at 6 o'clock, you will be at Di^lette at half past 6. The diligence does not leave before 7. You will have time to take a frugal repast such as I can offer you." But," said Masson, I am afraid of disturbing you, and yet —" Accept," said Marie. That is the best arrangement, for I could not get any milk early enough to give you any breakfast. Philom^ne has had an excellent idea." This was all so simple that the arrangement was made. After dinner, Masson said he was going to bid Madame Aubier good bye that afternoon, in order not to awaken her the next morning. Do you wish me to go with you?" asked Charles, seeing him take his hat. No, my friend, thanks. Excuse me if I confess to you that I would prefer your wife's society." Philom^ne opened her eyes wider still, but Marie was at once ready, and she saw them both disappear under the trees in the avenue. She then turned to Charles to say something disagreeable to him, but the latter was so profoundly absorbed in his journal, that it would have been necessary to have asked him a direct question to draw him from it. Madame Cr^pin preferred not to run that risk, and set forth wandering about everywhere, within and without the house. CHAPTER XXIV. Sorel and Trefoil. Dear Madame," said Masson, when they were beyond hearing distance, you will find me very absurd, but really I have a great desire to live a country life. Do you believe if I offered myself to father Beuron as a farm servant, I would have any chance, after 7 years, of winning Virginie according to the patriarchal custom of the Hebrews?" Marie could not help laughing. Father Beuron would probably find you a very bad farm servant," she answered, and he will have married his daughter before 7 years." Masson sighed; which was, however, rarely his habit, but as he doubtless would have been the first to affirm, love changes the character. To what saint shall I resort, then?" said he, in a melancholy tone. To Saint Patience. It is the one whose intervention is generally the most efficacious." And meanwhile, as you say, father Beuron will have married his daughter. Ah ! if I had only hoarded up a few sous ! If I had put in the foot of a woolen stocking all I have spent with! From to day I am going to settle down and practice economy. You will see what a savings bank we will break on New Year's Day. It will be my present to myself." And you will hurry to spend it all in buying cigars, or a Japanese cabinet, or a little clay statuette?" No, I will begin to hoard so as to be worthy of marrying Virginie some day." It is serious, then?" Very serious." Marie reflected a moment. I do not say that it is an absurd idea," she then continued. Certainly, I was only a country girl at the time of my marriage, infinitely less civilized than Virginie, and still Charles and I have been very happy." Well, you see?" The misfortune is," continued the young woman, that Mademoiselle Beuron has some little fortune." She?" exclaimed Masson, stopping suddenly. Why, yes. Did you not know it?" She has some fortune? Good bye, then, to my dream. I hoped she was poor. I said to myself that the modest competency I will have some day would give her pleasures she now ignores. But if she has some fortune, I am farther off from her than ever." He had so despairing a look, that Madame Verroy took his arm in order to bring him back to himself, and also a little to console him. Come," she said to him, Charles is right. Try to return to the ordinary ways of your tastes and habits. Probably you will think no more of Di^lette and its inhabitants in a month hence. If your fancy holds good, we will talk over it again." Will you help me?" said Masson in his most persuasive voice. I don't know. We will talk about it again. That is all I can promise you." Thank you all the same. What a misfortune! Mon Dieu! What a misfortune that she should be rich!" I do not see that it is an irremediable misfortune," said Marie, finally grown a little impatient with this discouragement. One still has at least the resource of being able to ruin one's self or to ruin one's wife. It seems to me that it is within every one's compass." On what, then, would you have us live?" the young man continued, pitifully. That is a oui that seems to be nicely placed," said Marie. Fortunately, here are the houses full of attentive ears, or else you would find some other reason for which to be doleful." Madame Aubier, who had almost entirely recovered from her attack, was struck with consternation on hearing of Masson's proximate departure. What, you are going away?" said she, and I, who imagined you would always remain here! And you also, will you go away too?" asked the old lady, turning towards Marie. You will go away never to return here again, like him. It is really foolish to attach one's self to people in this way. You only lay up sorrow for yourself. I had grown so fond of you all. And then, you have been so kind to me, and to the little one. Where is she?" Virginie appeared at the garden gate with a handful of sorrel and trefoil in her half lifted apron, and smiled at the visitors with a shade of embarrassment. Imagine," said her godmother to her, here is Monsieur Masson, who is going away." The sorrel and the trefoil descended gently down her apron and fell on the ground, and the young girl's rosy cheeks turned white with a pallor that gradually overspread all her face. Masson arose hurriedly to gather up the green leaves strewn over the granite threshold. Virginie leaned half over to prevent him, but a sudden weakness benumbed her members, and she was obliged to renounce the effort she had endeavored to make. She held her apron open, in which the young man replaced the green herbs, without hastening much, however. They did not speak to each other, they did not touch each other, and yet so many eloquent things were exchanged between them while, with one knee on the ground, he picked up the prosaic sorrel, that Madame Aubier became quite serious. What?" said she, turning suddenly towards Marie. The latter replied by a slight sign with her head. Falsehood was not in her way, and Madame Aubier had every right to know about what concerned her adopted child so closely. The old lady became grave, and continued looking at the pair on whom a bright summer sun was shining. When the last bit of trefoil had joined the others in Virginie's apron, Masson, leaning on his knee in order to raise himself, lifted his eyes towards the young girl. It mattered little to him that they saw him; he did not seek to make a mystery of his honest feelings. She read in his look, doubtless, all that he meant to put in it, for, with a slightly oppressed voice, she answered, Thank you, Monsieur." Then she passed slowly before him without looking at him, but her gown brushed the young man's bended knee, and she blushed. With the same quiet step, as though she were overwhelmed, she crossed the room and went into the kitchen, of which she shut the door. When she was alone, she shook out the sorrel mechanically on the table, then she threw her apron over her head and began to weep, not knowing why. Masson had arisen. He approached the old lady, and sitting opposite to her, took both her hands in his. In a few short and hurried words, he told her all his past and present life, his position, his hopes, of the new feeling that had overcome him, and which threatened to transform all his existence. He said he was ready to do anything that was asked of him, provided the young girl would be the reward of his labors. And, he added, I love her because she is as innocent and pure as her name. It is not for her beauty, great as it is; it is not for her fortune — I was unaware that she possessed any; it is not for her grace and her affection for you which has touched me above all; it is the virginal charm of her whole self; it is her candor; it is — He stopped, feeling he could not define what had moved him. It was so ethereal, so ideal an impression, that it defied words, and could not be uttered in speech. But Madame Aubier understood it, and approved it with a sign of her head. Then, have you never said anything to her?" she asked, with so authoritative a manner that it might have seemed surprising in the old, commonplace woman, did not the dignity of maternal feeling ennoble all that it approaches. How could I have spoken to her?" he answered warmly. It would have been taking something away from her charm. Here, before you, just now, I was on the point of so doing, and I did not dare to do it." Madame Aubier remained silent. And you belong to the theatre?" she finally said. It is astonishing. I thought you were an artist, and painted water color drawings." That, dear Madame, is a pleasure; the theatre is my occupation, and Heaven knows I would willingly change it for another." It is very strange," the old lady continued, that it should be Virginie's innocence that has fascinated you. I should have thought that, in the life you lead, you would care no longer for such things." Madame Verroy will explain that to you," Masson answered. It would be too difficult to relate in so short a time. Say one kind word to me, Madame Aubier, though it may only be in return for my frankness." You are an honest man. I say to you from my heart, You are a good fellow, and I feel a great deal of friendship for you — all the more since a moment or two ago, and especially because I did not believe my old heart capable of feeling so much for a new acquaintance. In growing old, you see. Monsieur Masson, one mistrusts new faces. But I do not know why, every one who comes from that house," she pointed to Marie, inspires me with an unlimited confidence." I will not make you repent of it," said Masson, much overcome. But about her, dear Madame, about her." ^^Ah ! my friend, she does not belong to me. And then, what guarantees can you offer her family?" I do not know. I would ask nothing better, but — it must be seen into — you must wait. And suppose she should not wish to have you?" Masson, who was bewildered for a moment, suddenly regained his courage. She? Dear Madame, if after the pain she felt just now, Virginie could love any other man than myself, she would no longer be the divine creature I have dreamed her, and I would be cured of my love at once." He smiled in a chivalric manner, and seemed so certain of his lady's honor, that the two women exchanged a glance, and smiled also. I promise you," said the old lady, to do nothing to harm you. For the present, ask nothing more of me. There are too many things to be weighed and reflected upon, for me to be able sincerely to promise you more." I understand, and thank you," said the young man, rising. It was already a great kindness on your part not to have turned me out of doors when you learned that I played at the theatre. But I do hold to it, you know. I will enter some office, where I can scribble on paper as uselessly as any other one, provided only you will not ask me to return to the Seminary." His gaiety and his courage had returned to him at the same time. He threw a glance towards the kitchen door, and Madame Aubier understood it. Virginie," said she, in a loud voice, what are you doing?" I am preparing the soup, godmother," answered the young girl's voice, a little veiled by her recent tears. The three friends looked at each other; the voice opened new horizons for Masson's hopes. Can you come and say good bye to Monsieur Masson, who leaves for Paris to morrow morning?" The response was long in coming. Evidently the young girl did not dare to confront her guest's looks, with her sad face and her red eyes. Excuse me, godmother, I cannot," she at last answered, in a feeble voice, and as if with regret. I adore her," said Masson in a low tone, carrying the old lady's hand to his lips. I esteem her more and more for her modesty and her angelic timidity. She has been weeping — she is weeping still. She loves me, Madame Aubier, no matter what you may say. She loves me, and does not dare to see me again, since she knows I love her. Tell her — no, you do not wish to tell her anything? She will know it without any one speaking of it to her. She will know that I carry away her image with me, to preserve me from the follies of my life — to teach me that one may be perfectly good and honest without having ever learned it in books. She will know, above all, that unless I was determined to overcome all things in order to obtain her, I would not have made her precious tears flow — unless I were a miserable wretch, and I am not that, Madame Aubier." The old lady took his head in her hands, and kissed him on his brow with the warmth of a loving grandmother; then she pushed him aside at once. Go away," said she, go away. You will make me lose my good sense. Go. Madame Verroy will write to you. May the good God keep you!" Masson left at once. Marie rejoined him almost immediately. She had only taken time to exchange 2 words with Madame Aubier, and those 2 words were encouraging for the young man. They took the road towards La Heuserie without speaking to one another. Each of them was overcome by deep feeling. The young girl's soul seemed to float above them, and to inspire them with an almost sacred respect. How all this changes a man!" said Masson at length, following the thread of his thoughts. I did well to come here. I go away better than I came. I owe to you the happiness and the honor of my life." Not to us," said Marie, smiling. To you. It is the example of your life with Charles that has inspired me with serious thoughts. Be sure, in many cases, the feelings one experiences are the effect of one's surroundings. To have changed me like this, it needed this simple life, devoid of all artificial element; it needed the sight of your happiness and your domestic peace; and then this superb sea, this enchanting country, your little modest, almost poor house these honest people, free from all artifice. I might have seen Virginie at your house at Paris, and probably I would not have noticed her, and certainly not loved her. But here it is the age of gold. Every one is good here." Excepting Philom^ne," said Charles's voice, who had come to meet them, and whom they had not seen. Imagine," said he to Masson, that she is afraid you are in love with my wife." Our three friends burst out laughing together. Do you think she believes it?" Masson asked. She pretends to believe it, at least, perhaps, in order to make me think so. Since you left, she has not kept still in any place. She wandered around with anxious eyes, going from the house to the gate, and returning to me with the look of a poodle who is begging to have a bit of wood thrown in the water for him to bring back. She was mad to come and meet you, but I did not wish to give her that pleasure. She would only have found you conspiring, my misfortune would have been sure. Well, and your affairs, Masson?" I adore her," the young man answered. They were so merry that this answer made them all three laugh, and Philom^ne was heartbroken at the echo of their gaiety, which reached her in the chimney corner, whither she had gone to keep her grief warm. CHAPTER XXV. NEW ASPIRATIONS. The sun, hidden by the high hills, had not yet illuminated the fine sand of the beach when Masson left La Heuserie. He set forth with a joyful step. At a turning in the road he bade good bye with his hand to the hospitable house that was still asleep, and descended towards the river's bank. He left without feeling sad; since the previous day a new man had been born in him, one more resolute, more calm, more worthy also. After the 10 or 15 years he had passed in the carelessness of a life that was but little severe, he hailed with joy the aurora of a new existence, and bent his neck, that had hitherto been rebellious, under the yoke of responsibilities, with a willing heart. The thought of working, of saving, of living as a serious man, far from frightening him, held a large part in the love with which the young provincial girl had inspired him. Such conversions do not take place in a day's time, unless the ground has been prepared beforehand, and if Masson had not been weary for a long time with an ill assorted life that had no future, he would not have been so strongly impressed by the charms of a simple and almost austere existence. The young actor had just sufficient talent not to be willing to renounce theatrical life, and yet not enough ever to make an illustrious name. Nothing was more natural, therefore, than that some day he should become disgusted with an existence without renown or any future; but the day might still have been distant if chance had not thrown him in that out of the way country, where civilization penetrates but very slowly, and where everything has retained a perfume of primitive simplicity. He knocked at Philom^ne's door in a preoccupied way, and with the look of a man who accomplishes a duty. Madame Crepin opened it for him herself with her most gracious smile. You were not in a hurry to leave," she said. You will scarcely have time to take a cup of milk. They are already harnessing the horses to the carriage. But it is not yet loaded. Sit down." Masson seated himself with the air of a half awakened man who still dreams. Philom^ne's home was not characterized to call him back to reality, for the strange objects with which it was peopled made one think of certain nightmares that have been illustrated by fantastic painters. His breakfast was very real, however, and soon the noise of wheels completely restored him to the possession of his faculties. He rose to leave. No, no," said Madame Crepin, retaining him with a gesture. The carriage has only come to be loaded near here, but they will come to tell you when it is ready. I have arranged it with the driver." I thank you," said Masson, making a violent effort to shake off his lethargy and to appear amiable. You think of everything." Madame Crepin smiled with a feeling of superiority. Indeed, she had thought of everything. She had thought of asking Masson to her house in order to annoy at once both Lavenel, who would be jealous, and Madame Aubier, who had taken possession of the young man in a truly unseemly manner. They would all plainly see in Di^lette that the Parisians found her nice enough to accept her hospitality whenever it pleased her to offer it. I think I shall soon go to Paris," Philom^ne said, in a careless way, leaning on her elbows on one side of the table. We will doubtless have a chance of seeing each other again there." Certainly," replied Masson, who was still preoccupied. He was thinking of La Heuserie, and said to himself that at that very minute the sun must be shining in a little window that he knew well in his room, that was, alas ! now empty. If you are desirous of going to the theatre ever, I will have some tickets for you, dear Madame." I do not refuse. Monsieur Masson; you are very kind. Then in a month we shall meet again." I shall be charmed to do so. You are truly very kind to have disturbed yourself for me so early." Nothing is a trouble when it is a question of persons one likes and esteems," the widow answered in an affable tone. Masson bowed in silence. What should he reply? However, the necessity of saying something urged itself so imperiously upon him that he was obliged to immolate himself. I sincerely hope that if you may have need of anything whatever in which my services can be of use to you, that you will apply to me, dear Madame," he said. I have some leisure time. I will be entirely at your disposition." I thank you, Monsieur. I promise to remember your friendly offer when the chance occurs," said the widow, with her grandest air. She felt herself a woman of the world at that moment. Masson thought the situation was dragging on to great lengths, when happily the driver came and gave, most unceremoniously, a great knock with his fist on the door. Where is the Paris gentleman?" said he. I saw him pass by a little while ago. Is he with you?" Here I am," said Masson, hastening to gather up his luggage. He was just leaving the threshold when he discovered Philomene's right cheek before him; he did his duty, and deposited a country like kiss on the obstacle. To his surprise, the left cheek presented itself in turn; he offered it an equal sacrifice, bowed, and found himself in the street with a certain feeling of relief. The carriage was waiting for him, and he was just getting into it when Madame Aubier's door opened, and Virginie appeared on the threshold. Leaving the door ajar, she quickly crossed the square and approached Masson, with her face covered with blushes, but without any embarrassment, feigned or real. My godmother does not wish you to leave without a word of friendship from her," she said in a low voice. She sent me to tell you she wished you all the happiness you deserve." She told you to tell me that?" asked Masson, more overcome than the young girl herself. Those were her words, Monsieur, and I repeat them to you as she said them to me." Your godmother is the best of women, and you are a good and kind young girl. Do not forget me, Mademoiselle." No," murmured Virginie in a very low voice. No, I will not forget you." Philom^ne at her doorway looked at them with gleaming eyes. Masson had the courage to cut short a conversation that he would have given much to have been able to prolong. He held out his hand to Virginie, who placed her own in it, without trembling this time, however. People kiss each other in the country," said he to her, but I do not wish to kiss you, there are too many eyes looking at us. If any one ever says anything bad to you about me, do not believe it. Do not believe anything against me. I He let fall Virginie's hand, and got into the carriage without daring to look at her. She returned to the house with her easy, calm step; and the door closed upon her, while the carriage started off. But just as it was going to turn the corner, he saw the curtain of Madame Aubier's window raise, and the young girl's face appeared by the side of the old lady's. He made them a respectful bow, which Philom^ne took as an answer to a good bye she was telegraphing him with her handkerchief; and of that sojourn, which was to make a new man of him, nothing more remained to Masson save the landscape before him, and a box filled with water colored drawings. Chapters 23, 24, and 25. Chapters 26 through 28 of Philomene's Marriages by Henri Gréville. Translated by Helen Stanley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 26. Plan for the Future. One feels all upset since Masson has left us, is it not true? Charles asked his wife one day when it rained. When shall we leave? When you like, dear. To-morrow, if it would give you pleasure. Not to-morrow, but let us see. He counted on his fingers, and after rather a complicated mental calculation, he ended by finding a solution. One can return to Paris with propriety on the 25th of August? Certainly. Well, we will return there on the 30th. That will give us about 10 days more here, which is longer than I need for finishing my work. And for me, to arrange my little plots with Madame Aubier. You would never suspect what is going on. Lavenel is paying attention to Virginie. Lavenel? I thought he was morally settled under Philom^ne's law. Has he not been in love with her for 60 years? I thought so too, but Madame Aubier confided to me under the seal of secrecy, that he goes to her house every day while Philom^ne is here, and the days she does not come he takes great care not to appear there. That gives one food for thought. Ah, my dear, let others think what they like, what does it matter to us? I believe, ma foi, that one ends by liking gossip just from listening to it." Marie went and laid her two hands on her husband's shoulders. And if Virginie loves Masson, must a creature like Theodore Lavenel be allowed to marry her?" Never in the world. I will oppose it formally. But does she love Masson?" She says nothing about it, and will never say anything. She is one of the kind who die of grief without opening their mouths, but her godmother is sure she loves our friend." Poor little one," sighed Charles. I presume in 15 days he will have forgotten her." My dear, you are cruel." Well, let us say 3 weeks, then. However that may be, do you want a wise bit of counsel that will cost you nothing? Philom^ne is coming with us, is she not?" Yes." Never speak either to Madame Cr^pin or before her of Masson or Virginie or Lavenel, either collectively or separately. If she speaks to you of them, turn your tongue in your mouth 70 times 7 times, before answering her. Be prudent, like King Solomon." What do you suspect? You frighten me." I suspect nothing, ground failing me on which to build my suppositions, but I foresee that some day there will be a collision between those 4 persons, and if we wish to keep our friends we must have our eyes open and not allow ourselves to be circumvented." By whom?" By Philom^ne. Do you wish to know what I think of her?" Certainly." Well, I cannot abide her." Marie reflected for a few seconds. Do you wish me to get rid of her, under some pretext?" she said. No, indeed. First, we owe her for the rent of this house, and, since she will not let us pay her for it, we must do something to please her. In parentheses, this is a lease that will cost us dearer than one at Trouville, and then she interests me, this consoled Arthemesia. She is not like everybody else. I am curious to see how it will all end." And then you say you do not care for gossiping," said Marie, laughing. La Fontaine was right. Je connais même sur ce point bon nombre d'hommes qui sont femmes." Nevertheless, I will go and pack our trunks." Good luck, and much pleasure may you have," Charles replied, taking up his pen. CHAPTER XXVII. A QUESTION OF TOILETTE. On a fine evening in the beginning of September in dust covered Paris, that was brilliant with gas and swarming with people, Monsieur and Madame Verroy, accompanied by Philom^ne and a maid, picked up on the road, reached their home. The pleasant house, which this happy pair had chosen for their nest, had never before seen so many strange packages and eccentric things coupled together as it then witnessed. People who seldom travel have an especial gift for tying things together that are the least calculated to be united; though they may bind the ephemeral unions solidly in packages rolled up in newspapers, they succeed only in producing anti-geometrical forms that are misshapen, incommodious, and utterly incapable of being stowed anywhere in the world, and which at some point invariably fall, collectively or separately, on one's head from the network supporting them in the railway compartment, or else roll between one's legs under the seat. Philom^ne, besides an immense and very heavy trunk that was full of useless things which she would never even unfold during her visit, had put the excess of her luggage in game baskets of different sizes. The Parisian who, in spite of his reputation for cunningness, is simple minded, imagines that game baskets are only made to hold oysters, game, plants with their clods of earth about them, in a word, things that cannot be put in a closed receptacle. It is erroneous. The people of Normandy use game baskets for carrying all sorts of things, which might explain why Marie, who was present at the unpacking of her cousin's things, saw issue from several of these receptacles, underclothes, a shawl, 2 pairs of boots, slippers, a comb, a mass book, a casket, a heavy lorgnette, which was, truth to tell, nothing less than the Captain's marine glass, an indefinite number of stockings, and many other things too long to enumerate. What have you got in your trunk?" asked Marie, urged to this indiscreet question from the oddity of this method of transportation. My clothes, my dear," Philom^ne replied, with an offended air. Ah ! very well. I did not know you were so well provided with things of every description." Philom^ne smiled with a delighted look. I am not quite without resources," said she, although, in reality, I am in a very precarious position as far as money is concerned. My late husband never let me want for anything, and I have enough with which to dress myself." She only spoke too truthfully. The room Madame Verroy had allotted to her cousin was soon full to overflowing with all the things which Philom^ne deemed necessary for her to have for passing a month at Paris. The closets being filled, they were obliged to hang up portmanteaux, and even these extended into the hall so numerously that the next day Charles, on leaving his room, got his nose among Madame Cr^pin's skirts that were so strongly impregnated with pepper, tobacco, vetiver and other suffocating substances, that he sneezed for more than half an hour without being able to stop. It is a false cold, cousin," Philom^ne said to him when she heard of the incident. It happens to me twice a year — when I pack up my winter things and when I unpack them — but it does not last as long as a real cold." Thank Heaven !" the young man replied. You encourage me, cousin. But you ought to have unpacked your things at Di^lette a good 2 weeks before coming here." Philom^ne put on her offended look, and Marie was obliged to use at least one game basketful of consoling words before she could win back a smile to her heart broken visage. When peace was re established, Madame Cr^pin asked a consultation with her cousin, relative to the woolen gowns that had caused the unfortunate nasal irritation at the Verroys'. The examination proved that nothing could be of any use, and the widow, looking more hurt than ever, sat down opposite her old clothes, letting her arms fall in a despairing manner. What shall I do?" she said in a voice full of tears. I am not rich enough to have some dresses made that I shall only wear a month; for you know, Marie, when I return home, I cannot put on a flounced dress and all the rest of it. I am going to return, that is all; it seems to me the only thing left to do." Her distress touched Marie's heart, who at once hunted in her wardrobe, where she disinterred a black cashmere dress that was simple enough for Madame Cr^pin to wear, and sufficiently modern not to make the passers by in the street turn round to look at it. She brought Philom^ne this opima spolia of a new kind, had a dressmaker fit it to her, and for the first time in her life, attaining and going beyond her boldest dreams at once, the dear soul found herself in the folds of a dress with a train. A dress with a train! Philom^ne Cr^pin in a dress with a train! The inhabitants of Di^lette would all surely have laughed had they been allowed to contemplate the sight, for in no country more than in Normandy does dress distinctly define the line of demarcation between the different classes, and a more than ordinary courage or boldness is necessary to overstep it. Philom^ne did not feel herself quite at her ease at the thought that she was wearing a dress with a train, just like a fashionable woman. She thought so, at least, not seeing herself in the glass, and besides, she was quite incapable of appreciating the difference there is in the way of dragging or letting one's skirt flow behind one. This unhappy train was the cause of much grief to the little maid. It could not be discovered through what miraculous means the sweepings that had been gathered up by the daybreak, were to be found everywhere about at breakfast time. Charles, who was annoyed by the daily repetition of this fact, ended one morning by scolding the poor maid severely, who took all the saints to witness in regard to the conscientious manner in which she fulfilled her daily task. It must be myself, cousin," said Philom^ne, coming in like a Deus ex machina. I gather them up with the train of my dress as I walk about in the apartment in the morning, while she is doing up the rooms." You should carry your train in your hand," grumbled Charles, turning his back on her. Why do you dress yourself so early in the morning?" Marie asked, endeavoring to soften her husband's rude frankness. I don't wear such long dresses before 12 o'clock." I am well aware that I know nothing about city customs," Philom^ne answered immediately. A poor country woman like myself cannot aspire to fine manners. Pardon, therefore, the stupidities I may commit here. But, my dear friend, do you not remember that it was yourself who forbade me wearing my country clothes here, so that I should not look ridiculous when people came to see you? Persons come to see your husband a long time before 11 o'clock; must I then appear ridiculous?" Renouncing trying to make any ideas enter so rebellious a mind, Marie answered : Do as you like." And Philom^ne continued dragging into all the corners the perverse sweepings that were determined not to remain still. CHAPTER XXVIII. A VISIT TO THE THEATRE. Masson appeared during these domestic agitations; he went there almost every day, before or after breakfast, remained an hour, and left, rested, graver and better than ever. He strictly conformed to the programme he had traced out for himself at Di^lette, and lived not like an anchorite, but as a man whose dream is elsewhere than in the life of the Boulevards. As far as appearances were concerned, nothing was changed. He might be seen at the same cafe with the same comrades, but he stayed there a shorter time, did not drink so much, and disappeared for entire hours together, which he passed either at his own house, at the Louvre, or the library, in the calm and retirement of the reading rooms or galleries that are so full on Sundays, so deserted on other days. I am good for nothing," he said to Verroy. I try at least to do nothing wrong." But the time was not lost that he spent in those places. His reading, a little capricious at first, was selected by chance from some book lying open on a table, whose title or print had struck him, and had become by degrees more methodical. He had become interested in the history of art, and applied himself to it energetically, in his walks in the Louvre as well as in his reading. It will probably be of no use to me," said he, but it is always that much acquired." His comrades had hardly teased him at all about his change, for he had not broken suddenly off with his old habits. He simply disappeared every day for a little longer time, so that one evening he heard some one say : We see nothing more of Masson. What has become of him?" And an acquaintance replied : It has been so for a long time ; it is nearly 2 years now since he retired from the world." It had only been for about 3 weeks, but one is so soon forgotten when ties have such little stability as such as these that makes absences appear eternal. He spoke but little of Virginie, not being able to find his friends alone for a minute. The implacable Philom^ne had taken possession of the Verroys as though she had created them with her own hands. Charles, through many pretexts, escaped her; but poor Marie could no longer rid herself of this companion who was as faithful and who stuck as close as Nessus's tunic. Philom^ne had determined to see Paris, wholesale and retail; and, making a pretext of her ignorance and inability, she made Marie take her to all the different places she wished to go, which was no small thing to do. You have known, Parisians, the martyrdom of pioneering country friends from the Champs Elys^es to the Place de la Bastille, who wish to see and learn everything about all things. You know what it has cost your light and subtle brain to have to tell about historical facts of which, perhaps, your knowledge is very imperfect; to be obliged to give minute explanations about things of which you do not know the least word; and all under the pain of falling deeply in the esteem of people who are much more serious and much better instructed than yourself. You have taken a gentleman to the Jardin des Plantes, who gave a lecture on natural history to his children, saying as he pointed out the elephant who stretched out his voracious trunk towards you: That pachydermatous animal is very sociable, and the gamins behind you call your friend the pachydermatous animal. You have vainly tried to oppose the purchase of some horrible Tunisian jewelry, some abominable harem pastille, that some well intentioned aunt with doubtful taste has given your wife, saying to her: My dear friend, I have brought you a souvenir from the Exhibition; and your wife has been obliged to display the horrors the next day at a large dinner, or, if she forgets it, the good aunt makes her remember, gently and firmly, what is due the presents of a rich relation who is very fond of you. You have explained about 100 things of which you do not understand an iota; repeated to them what you have seen in the journals in regard to the number of cubic metres the captive balloon contains, making a mistake of several hundreds only. But all this is nothing in comparison to the martyrdom of taking about Paris, in ordinary times, some woman who wishes to examine everything, and who stops before the small, dark, linen drapers' shops around the Halles, to see if they make caps there as they make them with us." There were no more bright and indefinable conversations that touched lightly on 1,000 subjects with implied words that every one understood; no more long aesthetical discussions with Verroy's friends. Masson found Philom^ne between himself and everything that was removed from the commonplace. She seated herself at his side, and took entire possession of him when it was possible, and when circumstances would not permit it, she looked at him talking, listening to him with her eyes as well as her ears. As soon as he had finished, she drew him towards her, as one draws a beetle, by pulling on the thread it has attached to its leg, and the poor man fell back into the dullest colored prose. He converses well," she said one evening, after he had left to play in his third act. Yes, cousin, but you do not let him talk," Charles replied. How can you say so? I listen to him all the time." When he speaks of what interests you." What do you expect? I am a poor, ignorant woman. I have never lived among clever people like yourselves. It is not my fault if I am wanting in manners." But she did not change her conduct. Why should she have done so? It pleased her to keep Masson near her, and to prevent his talking to others. The young actor, seeing in this a proof of troublesome but real friendship, tried to please her as much as it was in his power, by bringing her all sorts of little gifts that Madame Crepin seized with avidity, and buried at once in her enormous trunk that was a heavy and mysterious enigma, the key of which never left her. One night he took her to the theatre to see him act. Marie refused to go, first being too happy not to have to see again an uninteresting play that she knew by heart since a long time, and then at being able to pass a nice evening quite alone with her husband, a pleasure that had not been theirs for a long while. Without stopping about the question of propriety, a question which in this particular case could not be discussed, thanks to Philomene's age, and the disparity of their positions, Marie dressed her cousin with her own hands, put one of her bonnets on her head, and sent her off joyfully, with Masson as her cavalier. In the carriage which bore them away, Philomene showed herself but little communicative. Masson was obliged to undertake all the efforts of conversation, and with his customary generosity did not spare himself, so that they reached the theatre in a very pleasant frame of mind. Going to the ticket office, he said to the Minots, entrusted with the distribution of seats: Give me a nice little box for Madame, a relation of mine, who is at Paris for a few days." Minos looked at Masson's relation, and his glance clearly expressed a thought that might be thus translated: Your relation has a good style." Then he presented Madame Crepin a small, square, dirty card, which she let fall almost immediately. Masson, hurrying to pick it up, was pushed from behind by a crowd of people arriving, and getting entangled in the train of Philomene's gown, nearly fell on his nose on the ground. But by the help of a gendarme, who stretched out his arm to him, the accident was avoided. This way," said the young actor, still laughing at his mishap. Philomene, looking very prim, followed him, confronted by the glances of the doorkeepers, who seemed to reproach Masson for the bad taste shown in his conquest, and she soon found herself installed in a dark baignoire 2 steps from the footlights, that blinded her. You will not be badly off here," said the young man, when the doorkeeper had noisily placed a small, high stool under Madame Crepin's large feet, that were attached to her very long legs. I will return to you during the entr'acte." Are you going to leave me?" said Philomene tenderly, and not a little anxiously. To seek glory," Masson replied, with a comic heroic gesture. I am obliged soon, in the 3rd act, to say to the young rogues, By heaven, my lords And now I must go and see if everything is ready in my dressing room. Imagine, the other day, some one put my large comb in one of Norval's funnel boots, that he wears in the 2nd act. The unfortunate fellow pulled them on without looking inside of them, of course. When he reached the stage he felt something hurting him atrociously. It was impossible to take them off during the act, and as he was about to do so in the entr'acte, they came and told him a lady was awaiting him at the concierge's lodge. He flew there. It was only a trick. The bell for the 3rd act rang. He was obliged to appear on the stage still suffering dreadfully. I all the while was hunting for my comb. I could not find it, naturally, and I was obliged to play without having my hair combed, which, by the way, did not make a good effect upon the public. After the play was over, Norval took off his boots, the doctor was sent for, the poor fellow had his foot full of blisters. Some one put his hand carefully into the funnel and drew out my comb, broken in 3 pieces. Norval was not in a good humor, you may be sure, nor myself either. A distant bell sounded behind the curtain. ^^A tantôt," said Masson. He went away, leaving Philomene in a state bordering on distraction. The gas, the curtain with its hole, to which a new eye was applied every moment, the comb, the funnel boots — she imagined a tin funnel with a spout and handle, such as one sees at wine merchants' — all this whirled wildly round in her brain. Her small stool annoyed her, a chair placed behind her hurt her shoulder, and she did not dare to push these strange things away, that were put there for some purpose of which she was ignorant. People began coming in, and the theatre was filled with that particular sound, which is not either that of the roar of waves, nor the tumult of a marching day in a military station, but which in a manner resembles them both. The doorkeepers came in and went out with their rough vivacity, making the ugly deep pink ribbons on their dirty caps float everywhere, even as far as the front of the boxes. The sharp voices of the opera glass sellers sounded at regular intervals, like the croaking of an ominous crow. The instruments were being tuned in the way every one knows, and the bass drummer, who was placed nearly at Philomene's feet, after having gently touched the skin of his instrument, so as to assure himself it was in tune, spread out an immense journal, that covered the 2 drums, and read attentively some bit of news that was printed in very small type, which made him bend his back over in an alarming manner, when suddenly the gas mounted half-way up the footlight chimneys, 3 knocks were heard from no one knew where, the drummer threw his journal suddenly behind him, and a short and formidable crescendo of all the instruments, upheld by the rolling of the drums, ended in a frightful crash that made Philom^ne jump up with fear. The violins wailed a sentimental cadence, a loud noise of rolling scenes grated on her ears, while at the same time a current of cold, bad-smelling air struck her face, a black gulf opened before her, and strangely attired men ran hither and thither like madmen in the half-light. The curtain rose, and the play began. Philom^ne had read some theatrical plays in a volume that had formerly fallen into the Captain's hands, and the mysteries of entrances and exeunts were less incomprehensible to her than for some others, who had never read comedy plays, as they say in the country. But one thing puzzled her so much that she nearly lost the thread of the drama, already rather mixed up in her mind. Opposite to her, between 2 side scenes, of which she could neither divine the name nor use, but which space she designated to herself as a corridor, there were some lamps, and under these lamps persons in everyday dress, who did not seem in the least interested in what was taking place on the stage, 3 feet off from them. Placed as she was, Philom^ne was able to plunge a curious glance behind the scenes. What was her astonishment at seeing suddenly one of the madmen, who was running across the stage pursuing another, catch him at the entrance of one of the corridors, pierce him through with his sword, and draw back with horrified eyes, while the other, the one who had just been killed, arose and went quietly to talk with a gentleman in an overcoat, whom she recognized as Masson. The tail of a white horse that appeared at the latter's side made her entirely lose her head, and she threw herself back in her chair with the discouraged air of one who is struggling with something too strong for him, and who acknowledges himself vanquished. Torches were brought, the stage was lighted up, and the madmen disappeared after a general melee. The white horse, whose tail Philom^ne had already seen, now entirely appeared, a beautiful lady got off it, and 2 lovers murmured phrases to her that were as long as they were tender. Suddenly a gunshot was heard, the fair lady uttered a piercing cry, and fell down before the prompter's box, which was another puzzling mystery to Philom^ne. And the curtain descended amidst the groans of the violins, while one of the lovers raised towards the ceiling the slashed sleeves of his black velvet pourpoint. End of chapters 26-28. Chapters 29 and 30 of Philom^ne's Marriages by Henri Gréville. Translated by Helen Stanley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 29. How to Eat an Orange. The door of the box opened softly, and Masson put his head through the opening. Well, how are you getting on?" said the good fellow. Are you amusing yourself?" Certainly, Monsieur Masson, it is very interesting." For nothing in the world would Philom^ne have confessed that she understood absolutely nothing about it, and she put on a comprehending air. The young actress is very bad," continued Masson, but it is not her fault; she plays as well as she can. By and by you will see a superb scene, and then there will be a ballet." A ballet?" Philom^ne asked. Yes, with danseuses. It is very amusing, as you will see. A tantôt." Are you going to leave me alone in this way?" Madame Cr^pin asked, in a tone of gentle reproach. If you would only explain the play to me a little." Well, I do not act for an hour; I can stay for a little while. But don't ask me to explain the play to you; I have not seen it yet." What! Not seen it? Why, you act in it." I have seen the 3rd act in which I appear, but I have not even seen that entirely, because I leave before it is over; but the play is not good; it does not make much money, in spite of all they do to advertise it, and I have no curiosity to see it." A play in which one acts, and still has never seen the advertising — all this appeared so strange to Madame Cr^pin, that rather than believe it, she preferred to doubt Masson's veracity. Of course he spoke falsely in saying he had never seen the play, but it was only to make her think so in fun. But this fact, far from diminishing the esteem Philom^ne felt for her hero, increased it greatly. She considered falsehood a weapon, and the art of using it a proof of strength. That fellow is not stupid," she said to herself, but I am more cunning than he." Which was a sweet and comforting thought to her, if ever there was one. To prove her superiority, she asked Masson a number of questions, which, in her mind, went to show that she possessed an extraordinary knowledge of life and worldly ways. He answered with the good nature that formed the foundation of his character, without making fun of or deceiving her, which was meritorious on his part, for the temptation to do so was a strong one. Then he offered her an orange, which she accepted with the gratitude a woman might feel to whom a charming man, whose name is printed on the playbills, shows a mark of affectionate esteem in public. She peeled her orange — not very nicely, however, and here and there tore away a part of the pulp with her fingers that were rather clean, but which were terminated with nails that were not entirely so. This operation was performed on the lady's pocket handkerchief that she spread over her knees. Her handkerchief was made of coarse linen, ornamented with a very fine small red stripe. It had passed the day in Philomene's pocket, together with a number of various things, and was not the nicer for it. When the massacre of the orange was over, Madame Cr^pin put 2/4 of it back in the skin, and offered them to Masson. Thanks," said he, while a little sensation of horror ran over him, I do not like oranges." You say that in order not to deprive me of it," she said, smiling in a way that would have softened a rock. I saw you eat some this summer at my cousin's house. Do take it; all of it is not worth the half." This phrase, which the widow had borrowed from something she had read, left Masson defenceless. He took the quarters of the orange, rose, pretended to look about the theatre, and pointing out to his two kind friends' attention a lady wearing an extraordinary bonnet, he threw the orange behind his chair, and taking out his pocket handkerchief, wiped his fingers and lips, like a man who has just swallowed something very good. They are still a little green," he said. They will be better in a month." Philom^ne threw him an expressive glance. In a month," said the glance, I will no longer be here to eat oranges." But Masson did not understand, seeing which Philom^ne sighed. It is more amusing here than at Di^lette," said the good fellow, who thought quite the contrary. Yes, but I must, however, return there," said the widow, regretfully; but rest assured I shall carry away the memory of your friendship for me." In what the devil," thought Masson, does this good woman see friendship? Well, much good may it do her! It is very sad to see each other in this way, to be so happy together, and then to part to see each other no more." But you will see your cousins again, dear Madame. They intend to pass next summer at La Heuserie." They, yes, but you?" I, too? Ah, parbleu! I, too? What should I do elsewhere?" These thoughtless words escaped Masson in the warmth of his enthusiasm for the country that possessed Virginie, and Madame Cr^pin took them as meant for her. Let no one accuse us of improbability; such things occur every day, at every minute, and to every one; only when such things happen to clever people, they do not speak of them to any one. Do you then love that country so much?" she said, disguising her emotion in feigned merriment. I love it so much that I do not think any place in the world more beautiful." Ah ! so much the better. I do not see, however, what you find so beautiful in it." Ah ! dear Madame, everything — the sea, the sky, the cliffs, the verdure — everything — everything, in a word. I do not understand what beauty you can discover in the ugly gray rocks on the cliffs. The verdure is pretty enough, perhaps, although it is much more beautiful at Cotentin. I cannot explain what I find so especially charming in your country, but it touches my heart, and as Mignon sings, it is there I would wish to live." 3 knocks were heard, and Masson rose. Stay," murmured Madame Cr^pin, really beautified by a return of youthfulness and feeling that increased in her with surprising strength. It is impossible, but I will come after you before the end of the play, so you will not get lost in this crowd." He went out, shut the box door, and while the play was unravelling its mysteries, Philom^ne, thrown back in her chair, with her hands open on her knees, gave herself up to the most delirious dreams. Everything intoxicated her — the overheated atmosphere of the theatre, the public's attitude that awaited with trembling impatience the great and beautiful scene of the play, and prepared itself to break down everything with its applause. The passionate atmosphere in which a drama should live, if it is worth anything, acted upon Madame Cr^pin with all the more intensity because she found herself in it for the first time. She plunged into unknown gulfs with the emotion of a woman who is borne away on a swing, and who, clasping the ropes and feeling herself falling in the air on the frail piece of the board, breathes with delight the dizziness of the fall. Her head turned, her hands became moist, and she said over to herself: I love him! I love him!" and without asking herself why, or how, or what would be the morrow of this day that was unique in her life. Suddenly she caught up the playbill to see by what name he who would henceforth be the moving power of all her life was called in the play. He bore a sonorous name, but had he not said he should not play till the next act? However, she began to follow the drama with fresh interest. What would he do when the accidents of the play brought him upon the stage? She listened to the entire act with the same feverish attention that the other spectators evinced. When it was over, she turned towards the box door, hoping he would enter. She was aware, however, that Masson could not come, for he was dressing himself, but who knew? She had reached that state of mind that all of us have experienced more or less, wherein probabilities or improbabilities no longer exist; where the thing we most desire seems the only one that can possibly happen; where we believe everything, expect everything, through need of that common sense which would make us justly appreciate the proportion of events. After 10 minutes, that seemed 10 centuries to impatient Philom^ne, the bell in the foyer rang, and the theatre was filled again by people making the usual noise of those who return to their places after the entr'acte, when glasses of beer have been drunk in the caf6 down stairs, and when the public's first involuntary coldness is dissipated. It is the time for conversation between friends. Those who know the play announce to others, who have not yet seen it, the wonders which they are about to witness. In vain do some cry, Silence! And others, Sit down! The late people slip in between the rows of fauteuils, knocking over the ladies' small benches, and walking on the men's feet with the self-possession of persons who have paid for their seats and owe nothing to any one. Impatient and breathless, Philom^ne threw angry glances over the noisy and undisciplined crowd. Vainly did she stretch her ears; she could scarcely distinguish a few shreds of the dialogue. At length, the last late comer in the third gallery having ceased to quarrel with a gentleman who was but little forbearing, thanks to the happy intervention of the Municipal, she was able to follow again the increasing interest of the drama that was leading the breathless public towards a catastrophe. But what would it be? Those who had not seen the play could not divine it, so skilfully was the intrigue managed. At last, little Gadoreau, as Masson had said, fell, pierced with a terrible sword thrust, and Masson, with the Order of the Golden Fleece around his neck, his face white, rosy and fresh looking, wearing a jet black moustache, a crimson velvet cap, a white satin pourpoint, and a velvet mantle embroidered with gold, and followed by 20 men at arms, advanced, saying, with a resounding voice: By heaven, my lords, you have done a sorry task. My lord, the Duke! screamed the supernumeraries, falling back a pace. How handsome he is! Ah! how handsome he is! thought Philom^ne, feeling all her blood mount to her face. Dear Masson! cried her heart, which beat as it had never before beaten when near the defunct Captain. La Heuserie belongs to you and all that I possess, and the owner of those goods herself. Leaning over the front of the box, she followed the young man with passionate looks, without thinking of the public or the actors, so much so that when Masson, after a superb gesture, returned behind the scenes, one of his comrades said to him: Who is that yellow colored woman you have brought here?" Where?" said Masson, naively, who had forgotten all about Madame Cr6pin. There, opposite to us; she is devouring you with her eyes." That?" said the young man, placing a finger mysteriously on his lips. Silence! That is my tailor's aunt. I am in good luck." Villainous joker!" said the loud voice of the first gentleman, who was listening to them. One should not make fun of one's tailor's aunt; it is a useful acquaintance." So that no one, not even himself, would believe in Masson's good fortune, which was, however, real. But, alas! Philom^ne was not pretty enough to provoke calumny. The next entr'acte sped by, mortally long for every one except Madame Cr6pin, who continued to dream wide awake, and towards the middle of the following act she saw her hero re enter the box, clad in a frock coat, and in every way looking like himself, and not like the brilliant apparition of the third act. Ah! how well you play!" she said to him, forgetting all prudence to such a degree that the people near turned round. Why, there is Masson!" said some in the fauteuils. Annoyed at this circumstance, the young man turned his back to the theatre. Don't speak so loud," said he, discreetly. No, I do not act well, and it is absurd in them to trouble me to come here to utter such stupidities. But never mind. Is not the play droll?" Philomene did not find it droll at all, and Masson had all the trouble in the world to make her understand that the word droll has not the same signification for the inhabitants of Di^lette as for those of the Boulevards, and failing to do so, he finally gave it up. She has not a very open intelligence, thought he, with as little deference towards her as it was possible to feel. What an idea in the Verroys to hamper themselves with that woman ! Everything ends in this world, even mediaeval melodramas, and towards midnight Philom^ne found herself on Masson's arm, on an unknown boulevard, amidst the rushing to and fro of carriages and omnibuses, and 5 minutes afterwards was in one of those same carriages that was bearing her away, not very quickly, towards her cousin's abode. She had read in novels of similar scenes — how, at the coming out of a theatre, Arthur, being seated near Mathilde in a satin lined coupe, drawn by 2 full blooded horses, had at last found courage to speak of a passion that could no longer be restrained; how, emboldened by the darkness, he had dared to clasp the little hand of her whom he loved, and how the avowal of his passion fell eloquently from his lips, that had been sealed too long from a feeling of duty and reason. She thought over these thrilling scenes, but Arthur said nothing at all. He was sleepy, and was thinking that he certainly would keep the carriage to take him home, and that therefore he would have done better to have taken it by the hour, and that not having done so was a want of prudence on his part that might cost him a franc more, unless he happened to have a very conscientious driver. Masson saying nothing made Philom^ne sigh, and he felt himself obliged to speak to her. Well, do you think you will grow fond of going to the theatre?" he asked her in a calm voice. I do not know. I think I would like all plays in which you might act," said Madame Cr^pin, burning her ships. But this conflagration produced no results, for Masson replied at once, unmaliciously : I have, however, acted in a great many poor ones, and will act in many more of the same kind." Madame Cr^pin's ships felt humiliated at having burned in vain, but this was due, on the young man's part, to an excess of delicacy, or perhaps from being absent minded. Actors are renowned for the number and frequency of their thoughtlessnesses, and so she took heart of grace. They are soon going to give something else," continued Masson. After the first week I can get 2 fauteuils for you. I could not give them to you for the premiere, the seats are all disposed of beforehand; but Charles and Marie will tell you about the play." The premiere? What is that?" asked Philom^ne. The first representation of a new drama," the young man answered, putting a dot over his I. Will Charles and Marie go?" Certainly. There is never a premiere without them." ^^Ah ! observed the lady, with a stiff manner. It displeased her that her cousin should have an advantage over her, that did not come from their fortune, but from the consideration felt towards them, and from their notoriety. She said nothing about it, however, and brought back to a sense of her present situation by an emotion she could not overcome, she let the light of the carriage lamp fall on her ungloved hand, that she laid open on her knees. But Masson never dreamed of covering it with kisses. How slowly this horse goes!" exclaimed he at length, in despair at the duration of the drive. Does the time seem so long to you, then?" Philom^ne asked, coquettishly. To the contrary, dear Madame, but it is late, and you must be tired." Not the least in the world. I would like to drive on like this forever," she said, in a sweet voice full of restrained emotion. The diligence at Pieux even goes faster than this," said Masson, leaning out of the carriage window. I say, driver, if you don't go faster, we will get out and take another carriage." Ah, bien," replied the automaton. If you think that would punish me, you are mistaken." However, he hurried his horse a little, and our friends got out before the Verroys' house. So much the worse for you," said Masson. I will go the rest of the way on foot. I think I shall get home all the sooner." And he dismissed the carriage. I wish you good night, dear Madame." Good night, Monsieur. I thank you with all my heart. I assure you that never, Monsieur Masson, no, never will I forget this evening; and if I can do anything to prove my gratitude to you, nothing would be too much, you may believe me." You are too kind, dear Madame," said Masson, with his most ceremonious bow. I do not deserve as much as all that. Au revoir." When will you come again?" I do not know. The first day possible." In order to end the conversation, he had rung the bell himself. The door opened, and Philom^ne was obliged to enter it, and Masson went off joyfully towards his own home, without thinking any more of Madame Cr^pin than of his old roles and days past. CHAPTER XXX. Di^lette once more. The evenings were long at Di^lette, and they were obliged to light the lamp early. Madame Aubier's eyes were beginning to fail her, and she liked to wait to do so until the last gleams of daylight had disappeared. She watched from her window the red tints, then the orange colored, and then the pale yellow ones, lessening in the sky, until a tender green hue gradually overspread the horizon, where a scarcely perceptible vague light still floated, till the stars appeared, one after another. From over the darkened garden and across the black trees came the memory of many past hours to her, which slowly arose from the old lady's heart to her lips, while Virginie, seated on a low chair, listened to her talking attentively, holding her hands crossed on her knees. Since Monsieur and Madame Verroy's departure, the intimacy that had always been so tender between these two women had assumed a new character. They were no longer together as a matron and child, in their relation of protecting affection on one side and caressing deference on the other. There was a perfect harmony between these two pure souls, both of whom had their trials, and they understood each other entirely. Virginie had never made any allusion to what she felt for Masson, and her godmother had never given her advice or consolation concerning it; but in their looks, in certain gestures, in the tone of their deep feeling voices, in the long silences that followed the evening talks, was apparent a resigned trust on the young girl's side, and a deep pity on the old lady's. Nothing was changed in Virginie's sweet ways and her good temper. She went hither and thither, rendering kind services to every one — to Monsieur Aubier, with whom she played dominoes in the evening, in order to prevent his going to play them elsewhere; to the servant maid, whose work she lightened; and, above all, to her godmother, who never needed to express a wish, for a movement, a simple look, were at once divined by the young girl. But the merry gaiety, the songs she used to sing all day long, the good romps in the grass with the old fat dog, who recovered his legs to run after her, all this had disappeared with Masson. Her childhood, which had been prolonged by a tardy development of character beyond ordinary limits, had suddenly given place to all the anxieties, to all the dreams of youth. She was not sad; she was grave, feeling that a great change was taking place within her, and that she was entering a new life, that was full of joys and of unknown cares. Masson had departed, carrying away Virginie's heart with him; but he had not troubled her sweet soul. He had said nothing to her, but she knew, however, that he loved her, and, with the beautiful trust of innocent youth, she felt sure he would return, sure that he would ask for her hand. Would he obtain it? There was where her anxiety began. She knew nothing about him whom she loved. She had given her heart away without reflection, without precaution of any kind whatsoever. She knew he was an actor — Madame Aubier had told her so, and as Masson, who was very simple in his ways, had nothing of the adventurer about him, she said to herself that he went to the theatre to gain his living, honestly, as a clerk goes to his office. Was he rich? What did that matter to her? He was well dressed; he seemed comfortably off. What we call mediocrity is luxury in our peasants' eyes. He must, therefore, be rich. But would father Beuron be satisfied with that kind of fortune? Would he accept as a son in law a man who acted at the theatre? Virginie was afraid he would refuse him, and in the dread of that refusal she blessed the long suspense that gave her with its anxieties the trembling joys of hope. Since Philomene's departure a strange event had occurred every evening. At first Virginie attached no importance to it, but at the end of 2 weeks' time a vague disquiet had entered her observing mind. Lavenel went constantly to their house, under some pretext at first, and then by force of habit afterwards. He came in, bowed to them, sat down or stood up, brought them the news of the day, told Virginie some idle story to make her laugh, asked about father Beuron, his harvest, his cows and sheep, and then left, saying, contrary to the usages of politeness which gives precedence to old people: Good evening, Mademoiselle Virginie. Good night, Madame Aubier. Later, he began to show a preference in wishing to talk to the young girl. He would sit down beside her and play with her ball of worsted; sometimes in fun he would pull the wool, which would make Virginie's knitting fall out of her hands. He joked about her preferences and tastes, and this with so affectionate an air, that Madame Aubier conceived a secret antipathy for the man, who had been indifferent in his manner before. Was he, by any chance, daring to pay attention to Virginie? A man who was almost married, par exemple, it must be seen to. The young girl, who had suddenly become clear sighted, acted with reserve towards him at first, and then with coldness, but it had no effect. Madame Lavenel having gone several times to pass an hour with Madame Aubier, Virginie had managed to absent herself during her visits; but the old woman was only the more amiable the next time she called. Seized with real alarm, Virginie one day asked her godmother : Is not Lavenel engaged to Philom^ne?" I have been told so," answered the good lady, but neither he nor she have ever spoken to me about it." Virginie remained thoughtful a moment. Godmother," she then said, raising her lovely, honest eyes to the old lady's face, I perfectly detest that man." I also, my little girl," Madame Aubier replied. They then began to laugh with one accord, but the next day Lavenel found them colder and more reserved than ever. He left early, and 2 days passed without his returning. The two women were rejoicing over this result, when on the 3rd day Virginie received a letter from her father. It was a short and but little affectionate letter, such as he always wrote. He bade her return home immediately, saying her absence had lasted long enough. Virginie, after having read it, gave the paper to her godmother, who examined it carefully, and returned it without saying a word. What must I do?" asked the alarmed young girl, whose eyes were full of tears, that she was struggling to restrain. Obey," Madame Aubier replied, turning away her head, as though she were deliberating about something. But the pretence did not succeed either with one or the other of them. They looked at each other and burst into tears, then opening their arms, they clasped each other in a long embrace. There is something under all this," said the godmother at length. Be prudent, my darling. Say nothing to any one, and write me all that happens to you." Oh, godmother, to leave you, to leave this house! You have been so ill, I was so happy with you. I have never loved you so much before." The poor child felt her heart was breaking. She did not endeavor to pierce the mystery of the sudden command. It was enough for her to be obliged to bear the separation from all that she held dear. Would she not be 1,000 times farther away from Masson at her father's house? Be prudent, do you hear, my child? Do not displease your father or your stepmother." Virginie shook her head sadly. Displeasing her stepmother was her daily pain; and how could she help offending at every moment, by the simple fact of her existence, the avaricious, selfish woman who loved nothing but money, and who was angry at Virginie for being alive, because she would succeed to a part of father Beuron's inheritance, who was 30 years older than herself. And they will let you come back to me," Madame Aubier ended. This hope was the young girl's only real consolation. Nevertheless, it was with a heavy heart that she packed her valise, and set forth the next morning in the little carriole her father had sent to fetch her. The evening following her departure, Lavenel made his appearance at his usual hour. At the sound of his voice, Madame Aubier raised her head suddenly, and looked him full in the face. The grain merchant feigned not to see the movement, and looked all around the dining room. Where is Mademoiselle Virginie?" said he craftily. I have brought her some chestnuts. They are new ones." You know very well that Virginie has returned to her father's house," Madame Aubier said, in a natural manner. I? How should I know it?" said Lavenel, much astonished, but without changing color. As you have been to father Beuron's house, you ought to know what takes place there." Who could have told you, Madame Aubier, that I have been to see father Beuron?" replied the good man, without lying, but not without dissimulating. Every one knows, do they not, that to dissimulate is not to lie? He did not deny it, but he could deny it presently, should it be the case that no one had betrayed him. It was a letter from Beuron that apprised me of it." At all events, he could not have told you so," answered Lavenel, becoming anxious. It is not always necessary to tell me things for me to learn them, my dear Monsieur," said Madame Aubier, with a cunning smile. And, by the way, have you lately received any news from Philom^ne Crepin?" I?" said the betrothed man, nearly falling backward with surprise. My good lady, why should the widow Crepin write to me?" Dame! People write to each other sometimes when they are even farther separated than yourselves. I thought she would keep you informed about her affairs." Oh! Philom^ne does not talk to every one about her affairs. Every one has his own, is it not so? She is getting on at Paris as she likes; she is in good hands, moreover." Madame Aubier looked at the wall in an absent manner. After a short silence, she continued: In good hands, you say? How do you mean?" and she fastened as void a look as possible on her visitor. Ah, mon Dieu! said Lavenel, in an innocent way, there are some people who say she has promised them her inheritance. You have certainly heard that spoken of. The old lady continued staring at him, and he was obliged to end his phrase. If she has promised them her inheritance, it is probably they take good care of her, for fear of being disinherited. That would not be very clever on their part, observed Madame Aubier, for if they take too good care of her, she will live as long as they do, and who would have her inheritance then? Lavenel bit his lips. His mother had strongly cautioned him not to irritate Madame Aubier. He would have done better to have listened to the counsels of maternal wisdom, but youth is presumptuous, and it is a consolation to say this to one's self when one is 40 years old. It must be of some concern to you if Philom^ne has made a will in favor of her cousins, for, after all, when people marry, it is customary for them to make a settlement on each other. Caught in a snare, Lavenel muttered something about notaries, who asked nothing better than to make people spend money, and how much happier people were who married each other without any contract, under the law of a union of property. Then he looked into the street, announced to his hostess that it was very dark, after which he left in a state of mind analogous to that of the fox who had been caught by a hen. She is not a woman, said he to himself, she is the devil in person. How did she know that I had been to father Beuron's house? Bah! Some gossip has told her that I started off from Di6lette in that direction. I went by the way of Les Pieux, however, but people are so talkative. They are never quiet till they have told all about their neighbors' affairs. However, he entered his home in a thoughtful mood. Well, said his mother, on seeing him. She will put some stones under our wheels, mother, replied he. It is not arranged yet. We will have some trouble. We will only have the more merit in getting the better of it. This truly clever woman answered him, who had, however, never read Corneille. Chapters 29 and 30